everyone, my name is Jenna Van Mourik, and welcome to another episode of the Biblical Fiction Buffs podcast. Today I wanted to talk about annotating books, and specifically annotating biblical fiction. So my process, tools that I enjoy, why I like to annotate books, and all of that kind of good stuff is what we're going to get into today. And a lot of these things have a lot of carryover or crossover in terms of like maybe, annotating or journaling in your own Bible. But specifically, this is how I approach biblical fiction and tend to take notes as I'm reading, because if you don't know, I am of the unpopular opinion that books are better when they have signs of obvious use. I know that this is going to be controversial, and let me tell you before anyone comes at me, I see the other side, okay? I see the point of view of like books are, a treasure, and we hold on to them and we save them and we should try to like preserve them and keep them in good condition. I am not arguing that you be one of those people that just throws your book into your purse and lets all the pages get torn up. I feel like there's a miscommunication here. What I am saying is that I personally love to write in my books, because then when I go and reread them, I can see all my old notes and I can kind of be reminded of what I learned or what I enjoyed. And especially, I don't do this with every book, but with books that have been passed down to me by like family members, I love when I see their notes in them. And I love the idea of like potentially passing on my own books to somebody in the future and them having little pieces of my thoughts. So I personally like to annotate books, and I'm not sitting there like, I take good care of my books. I don't break the spines. I dog ear the pages, but I'm not aggressive about it. Like, it's just, I just like to annotate them. And I don't annotate every book too. Like, if I'm just reading for fun, unless something really sticks out to me and I feel the sudden violent urge to go grab a highlighter, I don't annotate or write down everything I see in every book, but it is something that I enjoy doing and that I feel like helps me to remember even more of the book after I've finished it. And this is also something that you could potentially do in like a reading journal, or if you had like a journal that you use to record like your favorite book quotes and your book reviews and all that kind of stuff. A lot of people have a lot of different ways of doing this and recording the books they read, and some people don't at all. So it's all up to personal preference, but I love to annotate a biblical fiction novel specifically. So today I wanted to talk about it and how I do that and what I use and all of those good things. So let's get into it. So I guess to answer the question of why should you annotate a book, if you wanted to take notes, or if you wanted to make sure that when you reread it, certain things stuck out to you, or if you wanted to highlight a particular passage that touched you, or if you're, a lot of times the case in point for annotating a book is if you're studying it. For instance, like in college, we annotated a lot of chapters and things that I did for like my classes on like literary criticism and that kind of thing, just inserting little notes. And obviously that's that's a much more formal process than just, writing notes in the margins of your own fiction books at home. But same kind of idea. You're just sort of pointing out or commenting on things you want to remember or things that you think are important or interesting. And the different things you might annotate can vary from person to person, whether that's book quotes, or if you're a writer, you might annotate and point out, the use of tools like style and foreshadowing and, descriptions and active voice versus passive voice and all of that kind of thing. Or you might just write down your reactions to things and journal sort of how you felt about certain plot twists or big character reveals or moments and things like that. So there's all sorts of reasons why someone might annotate a book, and the fun part about it is that everyone annotates books differently. So I enjoy annotating books for book clubs and things like that, and what I share in book club might not be what you would share in a book club. So that's kind of another part that makes it fun and interesting as well. So my process for annotating books is I usually pick out a pen. And I'm very particular about my pens. I've been introduced to quite a few different pens over the years, different kinds of pens and gel pens and all kinds of pens, felt tip pens, you name it. And while I have loved a lot of the pens I have tried, there is one in particular that I always come back to more than all the other pens, and that would be the Pilot G2 number 10 pen. And it makes a little click sound just like this. I am, in fact, holding one right in front of me, and it's a plain black one. Again, though, that number 10 part is very important. I have a bunch of Pilot pens right in front of me right now because I pulled out my little, I have a pencil case that I keep all of my tools in for Bible journaling and also annotating my books. And I really prefer the smoothness of the number 10 pen. And if you're not into like pens and stationery, this whole section of the podcast is going to be so boring to you, and I totally apologize. But if you're a fellow pen nerd like I am, then you will know the magic of this pen. And yes, I'm aware it's kind of basic. It's not, it's not a super fancy pen. It's not, like a calligraphy pen or anything like that. But it is my preferred kind of pen. And I have a bunch of them in black, but I also have a whole series of the pen in rainbow colors. And that is a very important part of my process, okay, when I'm annotating a book. Because usually what I will do, and the same is also true for like my Bible study, but that's kind of a separate topic. What I usually do is I pick a pen in the color that kind of I feel goes with the book, or maybe goes with the cover of the book, or that just fits the mood of the book. So like for A Light on the Hill by Connie Lynn Cassette, I might pick a very beautiful blue or turquoise pen. For Bread of Angels by Tessa Afshar, I'd probably pick a purple pen because it's about Lydia. And I like to very specifically, there's a reason behind just aesthetics why I pick a colored pen for when I annotate. And that is because sometimes I will read or annotate the same book more than once. So once I've picked my color pen, for instance, I will open up the very first page of the book, like the inside cover first page, and I will write in the very top corner my name, the date I started with the year, and then when I finished it, once I finished it. So like in the top corner of a book, say, the most recent book I read was Whirlwind by Dana McNeely. So I'll write at the top corner of the inside cover, Jenna Van Mourik started whatever date I started, 22, and then finished whatever date I finished. And I'll do that so that when I see that color, when I see those annotations in that color throughout the book, I will know when they are from. And then if I ever go back and read it, I read it again and I annotate it again, I will choose a different pen color, and then I will write again my name, the dates I read, kind of like a library card almost, and then I will annotate it so that I'll be able to tell the difference if I put in, different notes. If I essentially say the same thing, I won't write the same thing twice, obviously. I'll just add new ideas or new observations, but that way I'll be able to tell the difference between like notes that I wrote when I was in high school versus notes I wrote when I was in college versus notes I wrote when I got married. And I think the only book I've ever really read that many times is The Pharaoh's Daughter by Misu Andrews, but you guys kind of get the idea. So I always have a Pilot G2 pen, number 10, in a color that matches the book, and I'll try to pick a different color every time or for every book, because that's just one of those things that makes it more fun and more exciting. And if I really wanted a finer point, I'd choose a finer point pen if I was thinking I'd take a lot of notes, but personally I really just prefer the way the number 10 point pen writes. Like that's my personal preference, because it's a lot easier on my hands and my wrists do tend to get sore. So that's why I've chosen that one. Another thing that I always make sure that I have in my pencil case is a little bit of whiteout. And then I also use highlighters. And I know that there are a lot of people out there who are extreme connoisseurs of highlighters that highlight well, but also don't bleed through paper. I personally have yet to find a highlighter that I enjoy using that doesn't bleed through the paper, and I almost always just use a Sharpie highlighter. So for all intents and purposes, let's say I'm reading a book with a blue cover, I'm gonna have my blue Pilot G2 number 10 pen, my light blue Sharpie highlighter, and my whiteout. And then the last thing that I always keep in my pencil case are mini Post-it notes. And then as far as my process goes, usually I'll use the highlighter to highlight any of my favorite quotes or any of the quotes that I feel are like most important. Like sometimes when you're reading, you can kind of get a sense that like, oh, this conversation is going to be important later, and I'll highlight that. And then ways that I use the pen is for obviously writing in the margins, and sometimes I'll just write reactions. A lot of times I will also journal specific biblical passages or references to Bible verses that either the story makes me think of or that are appearing in the story, or, things like that. I will write down connections to scripture, maybe questions, not, that I'm expecting answers to, but questions to ponder when reading, like how does this apply to this? I'll also highlight or point out parts that are the author's research, maybe a historical fact that I didn't know. Like, I read a book that was heavily from the perspective of someone who served as like a cook or a baker in a grander, bigger house, I guess, in ancient times. And there was so much research in the book about kitchens and cooking and recipes and, just different methods there in the story. And I wrote a bunch of notes in the margins about that because I was just so fascinated to learn that information about history and historical time periods. That's something else I really enjoy. And then lastly, a lot of times when I'm annotating, I will just write the silliest notes, or maybe I'll put a bunch of exclamation points near something that was like super important or super powerful or just so, touching that I can't even put it to words. I just sort of draw a bunch of lines next to it and arrows and exclamation points as if to just say like an inaudible, unintelligible scream of just awe at either the writer's skill or the truth that they're portraying, or, the message or the plot twist, right? If it's a Tessa Afshar book, it's probably the plot twists, which was very, very much the case when I recently read The Hidden Prince by Tessa Afshar as well. I know that not everyone is like this. Not everyone reads just Christian fiction either. Like, I pretty much typically only read Christian fiction or biblical fiction at this point in my life just because I'm not really interested in anything else, and that's perfectly fine because reading is down to personal taste anyways. But for me personally, if I am picking up a Christian fiction book, it's because I want to be reminded to open my Bible, and I want to be reminded of scripture, and I want to be reminded of, a particular truth. And not every Christian fiction book is like that, and that's not a bad thing, and not everyone who reads Christian fiction is like that. Sometimes people will just read it because they want, uplifting content, or they want content that's clean or that doesn't include mainstream messaging in it, or just different things like that. Personally, I enjoy reading books that I feel like teach me something or give me a lesson to think about or a moral of the story, right? Annotating my books is a way that I feel like I can take more out of the story and learn more about how I can apply the ideas in the story to my own life, or how it might connect to scripture, and what scripture verses it might point me back to if I want to match up my fiction reading with my personal Bible study as well. So that is kind of my process when it comes to annotating biblical fiction. Tools I use to annotate and why I annotate. I do realize, and I completely recognize, that a lot more of this podcast episode than I originally intended may have been devoted to talking about different kinds of pens and highlighters and stationery products, and I do apologize, but if you have any recommendations for magical highlighters that don't bleed through pages, or you have a pen that you prefer, or just passionate feelings about writing utensils of your own, I'd love to hear them. Thank you so much again for listening to this podcast. Be sure to check out all of our links and all of that kind of thing to connect with us on Instagram and subscribe to the podcast and just, all of those fun internet things. Thanks again for listening, and I will talk to you guys in the next episode.